There is breaking news tonight in the search for Nancy Guthrie. Investigators have reportedly uncovered more images from her home camera captured before her disappearance. And tonight as well, the sheriff is raising real concerns that the kidnapper could potentially strike again, as forensic scientists believe DNA now could hold the keys to this case. Our Brian Enton back for us once again. Tucson, Arizona tonight with the very latest. Brian?
At 2:28 in the morning on February 1st, Nancy Guthrie's pacemaker transmitted its last signal. 8 minutes after that, a car moved through a residential back road 2.5 miles from her home. The drive between those 2 points takes 6 minutes. The sheriff has confirmed the timing is consistent. 1 month has passed. Nobody has been arrested. The man who walked Nancy to her door 4 hours before she disappeared has not said a single word in public. The man whose height, build, and facial hair align with the FBI suspect description sat down with the New York Times for 40 minutes of denial and has not heard from investigators since. And the sheriff's department has now directly contradicted 4 of the largest news networks in the country about whether the suspect ever visited Nancy's home before the night she was taken. This case is not slowing down. It is breaking apart. And the breaks are exactly where the truth hides. The car. That is where this starts because the car reframes everything that came before it. A couple named Elias and Danielle Stratagulis live approximately 2.5 miles from Nancy Guthrie's home in the Catalina foothills. Their house sits on Camino Royale, a residential back road that bypasses every major intersection between the Guthrie neighborhood and the arterial roads feeding out of the area. Their street-facing Ring camera recorded 12 vehicles between midnight and 6 o'clock in the morning on February 1st. One of those vehicles appeared at 2:36 a.m. Nancy's pacemaker disconnected from her iPhone at 2:28. NBC correspondent Liz Kreutz drove the route herself from Nancy's house to the Stratagulis camera location. Took 6 minutes. She selected a path that deliberately avoided the major intersections, the same kind of route a person leaving a crime scene at 2:30 in the morning would choose on instinct. Think through the timeline carefully. At 2:28, the pacemaker goes offline. Nancy is being moved away from her phone, carried beyond Bluetooth range, or the device is disabled. Add 6 minutes of driving through dark residential streets at a speed that does not draw attention. That puts the vehicle at the camera at 2:34, but the car appears at 2:36, a 2-minute gap. That is the margin you would expect from a driver who paused at the end of the street, checked the mirrors, removed a mask, confirmed the road was clear, and then pulled onto Camino Royale. Retired NYPD Detective Pat Broen reviewed the footage with his team and concluded the vehicle is a Kia Soul. Not a van. Not a truck built for cargo. A compact crossover. The kind of car that disappears into any neighborhood at any hour. The kind of vehicle that does not register in the mind of a neighbor glancing out a window at 2:30 in the morning. If you are planning an operation where invisibility is the highest priority, a Kia Soul is nearly a perfect choice. It is common, quiet, and forgettable in a way that most vehicles in its price range simply are not. Now look at the route itself. Camino Royale does not connect directly to the interstate. It feeds into East River Road, a secondary artery running east to west across the northern edge of Tucson. From East River Road, a driver can reach Oracle Road heading south toward the city, and eventually toward Interstate 19, which runs toward Rio Rico near the Mexican border. They can take Campbell Avenue south through residential corridors. They can follow Skyline Drive along the foothills toward Oro Valley, where Tommaso Cayan teaches, where he and Annie live. Or they can go east, into open desert, sparse residential land, washes and trailheads that investigators have flagged as search priority areas. Every direction tells a different version of this story. Former Nassau County Lieutenant Michael Gould assessed that if Nancy did not survive, her remains would most likely be located within 2 to 5 miles of her home. 2 to 5 miles. The Stratagulis camera is at 2.5. The glove was found at 2 miles. The geographic radius is closing around the same ring of land. The FBI knows which direction that car was traveling when it passed the camera. They have not said. What gives the Stratagulis footage its weight is not just what was on it. It is how it was found. The Stratagulis home sits outside the 2-mile canvas perimeter that investigators established around Nancy's home after the abduction. They told Fox News Digital that no one from law enforcement had ever knocked on their door. No one asked for their footage. They came forward on their own, after watching news coverage, after realizing their camera might have captured something the investigation had missed. The FBI searched 2 miles. The car appeared at 2.5 miles, half a mile beyond the boundary of the search. If Elias and Danielle Stratagulis had not been paying attention to the news, had not thought to check their camera, had not called Fox News themselves, this footage would not exist in the public record. The question that remains open is how many other cameras between 2 and 5 miles from Nancy's home are holding footage that no one has ever requested because the original perimeter was drawn too tight. The sheriff confirmed on February 27th that investigators are now reviewing vehicles in areas further from the crime scene. That confirmation came 26 days after the abduction. 26 days before law enforcement officially acknowledged that the 2-mile perimeter may not have been wide enough. Separately, a neighbor near the Camino Royale route told Fox News Digital that she saw a suspicious man walking near what looked like an abandoned car on February 2nd, the day after Nancy was taken. She described him as younger. She said he did not look like someone out for a walk. She mentioned it to her husband at the time but did not report it to investigators until after the disappearance became public knowledge. That sighting places an unidentified male on the same back road, one day after the abduction, in the vicinity of the vehicle route, near a car that had no reason to be there. That detail has not been followed up publicly. Its significance depends entirely on what investigators have done with it privately. Now the 12 cars. Because the FBI's handling of that footage demands scrutiny. 12 vehicles passed the Stratagulis camera between midnight and 6 a.m. on February 1st. When the footage went public, it appeared to be a breakthrough. Match a plate to a suspect and the case opens. TMZ reported that a source connected to the investigation said the FBI reviewed the footage and called it a dead end. The question no one has pressed hard enough is how the FBI determines that 12 vehicles near the scene of a kidnapping during the exact window of the crime are all irrelevant. 3 possibilities exist. They identified every vehicle and confirmed every driver has no connection to the case, which requires registration lookups, interviews, and cross-referencing against the tip database for all 12. They determined the footage quality or camera angle does not meet evidentiary standards. Or they already know which vehicle was used, and none of the 12 match it. That third possibility means the FBI has identified the suspect's car through other footage, possibly from the 10,000 hours they have been processing, and has not disclosed it. ABC News sources said investigators have had glimpses of vehicles from various cameras, but have not yet associated a particular vehicle with the kidnapping. That statement is carefully built. It does not say they have no vehicle lead. It says they have not associated one yet. The gap between those two statements is the gap between a dead investigation and a live one that has not reached its public conclusion. If Broen's identification holds and the car at 236 is a Kia Soul, that vehicle becomes a searchable parameter across every database available to investigators. Arizona Motor Vehicle Division records contain registration information for every Kia Soul in Pima County. Make, model, year, color, registered owner, home address. Cross-reference that list against the people connected to this case and the number of relevant vehicles shrinks fast. Cross-reference it against the geographic radius, owners who live within 10 miles of Nancy's home, and it shrinks further. Cross-reference it against the timeline, owners whose phones went dark between midnight and 4 a.m. on February 1st, and the list may collapse to a single name. License plate readers positioned along Tucson's arterial roads capture plates automatically and continuously. If the Kia Soul passed a reader on East River Road, Oracle Road, or any major route during the early morning hours of February 1st, that plate is in the system. If the same plate appeared near Nancy's neighborhood on January 11th or January 23rd, a pattern is established. The car does not need to have been caught at the crime scene. It needs to have been caught on the roads leading to and from the crime scene on multiple relevant dates. And license plate reader data is retained for months. The investigation has had 30 days to run that analysis. If the vehicle has been identified, the registered owner has been identified. And if the registered owner has been identified, investigators are building a case around that person's movements, communications, and associations right now. Public silence does not mean the investigation has stalled. In cases where investigators believe multiple subjects were involved, the arrest comes after the full case is constructed, not before. Moving on one suspect too early alerts the others. The FBI absorbed that principle from decades of organized crime prosecution. You do not move on the first target until you are ready to move on all of them at the same time. 10,000 hours of footage. More than a year of continuous recording across dozens of cameras. The FBI has been processing this archive since the first week. Somewhere inside those 10,000 hours is the car that carried Nancy away. If Broen is correct, a Kia Soul is now a searchable filter across every piece of footage within a 20-mile radius, every ring camera, every traffic camera, every gas station lens, filtered for a vehicle matching that profile during the relevant window. The FBI has the computational resources to run that analysis. The question is whether they have already completed it and are protecting the results while they build a case that will hold up in court. Now the contradiction that should concern everyone who has followed this investigation closely. In the days after the FBI released the doorbell camera footage, multiple news organizations reported through independent law enforcement sources that the suspect had visited Nancy's porch before February 1st. ABC News reported it first. CBS confirmed it. NBC confirmed it. CNN verified it through a source who stated directly that the masked individual had been at the doorstep on more than one occasion. The evidence cited was specific and consistent across all four networks. One FBI-released image shows the suspect without a backpack or holstered weapon. The video shows him with both. Same clothing, different equipment, 2 different visits on 2 different days. On February 28th, the Pima County Sheriff's Department called this theory purely speculative. They said the images show the suspect in various stages of attire, but that there are no date or timestamps to prove the individual visited the property on different days. For news organizations with 4 independent law enforcement sources confirmed an earlier visit. Then the Sheriff's Department denied it publicly. One of 2 things is true. Either ABC, CBS, NBC, and CNN simultaneously published source reporting built on false information from law enforcement insiders, a coordinated journalistic failure of historic scale, or the sources inside law enforcement are telling the truth and the sheriff's public denial is a deliberate investigative strategy. If it is a strategy, it serves a precise purpose. If the suspect believes investigators can only prove 1 visit, he constructs an alibi for 1 night. If he learns they can prove 3 or 4 visits, he has to account for 3 or 4 separate nights. That is exponentially harder to defend. Denying the multiple visits publicly while investigating them privately keeps the suspect locked into a story that investigators already know is incomplete. That is counterintelligence methodology. Give the target less than you know. Let them commit to a version of events you can dismantle later. But if the sheriff is genuinely contradicting the FBI's own leaks, if the 2 agencies are not aligned on what the evidence shows, then this investigation has a structural problem that no amount of DNA processing will fix. Because an architect and operative conspiracy requires coordination to execute, and defeating that coordination requires an investigation that is at least as coordinated as the crime itself. The antenna in the suspect's pocket. Former FBI agent and CIA officer Tracy Walder reviewed the doorbell footage on the Brian Enton Investigates podcast and identified what appears to be an antenna visible through the suspect's jacket. She assessed two possibilities: a walkie-talkie or a signal jammer. Her walkie-talkie analysis carries real weight because of what it implies about the operation. A walkie-talkie is short-range. It does not generate cell tower records. It does not connect to Wi-Fi networks. It does not leave the digital trail that a cell phone creates with every ping. If the suspect was communicating with a second person, someone in a vehicle staged nearby and waiting for the signal to move, a walkie-talkie is the only method that avoids detection through the tower dump analysis that the FBI is conducting. Walder stated it directly. A getaway vehicle is going to be critical in this case if there is someone else that helped. That would be a way, obviously, you would not want to use a cell phone to communicate with someone to bring a car to a certain location. That statement from a former FBI agent and CIA officer describes the two-person operation this series has been building toward since its second video. An architect who provides the intelligence. An operative who enters the house. A driver who stages the vehicle on a back road, possibly Camino Royale, and waits for the walkie-talkie signal. At 2:28, the pacemaker disconnects. The signal goes out. The car moves to the pickup point. By 2:36, the vehicle is 2.5 miles away and accelerating toward the route out. Walder also assessed the second possibility, a signal jammer, a device that is illegal to operate in the United States. That second possibility, if her assessment holds, would explain a different anomaly entirely. Nancy's Nest camera went offline at 1:47 in the morning. Her pacemaker lost its Bluetooth connection at 2:28. Both devices rely on wireless signals, one on Wi-Fi, one on Bluetooth. If such a device was activated in or near the house, it could disrupt both within its effective range. That would explain why the camera died before the suspect was picked up on it at 2:12. The interference was activated as the suspect approached, cutting the camera's transmission before it could capture a complete recording. But Walder added a critical observation. She does not believe the suspect brought cell phones to the scene. Her reasoning was precise. If he had, investigators would have identified him through cell tower data already. The digital blackout was deliberate. The suspect understood that phones are trackable and made a decision, before ever approaching the house, to leave them behind or disable them entirely. Digital forensics expert Heather Barnhart, who analyzed phone data in the Brian Kohberger murder case, reinforced this on Fox News. She said the digital blackout itself may be the key to the case. The absence of a signal can be as revealing as the signal. If a phone that normally pings towers continuously through the night goes dark for 3 hours on February 1st and comes back online at dawn, that gap is a digital fingerprint. Barnhart put it simply, your phone is the silent witness to your life. Barnhart also raised a detail that has received far less attention than it deserves. A suspect's phone may have touched Nancy's home Wi-Fi network even without connecting to it, simply by being in range. Router logs from Nancy's home and neighboring properties could contain records of unfamiliar devices that appeared in the area on the nights in question. The FBI recovered residual data from Google's back-end servers related to the Nest camera. Router logs may have been recovered as well. If a device registered to anyone in the network connected to this case appeared in range of Nancy's Wi-Fi on January 11th, January 23rd, or February 1st, that data exists on a server somewhere. It does not require an active connection. The presence alone is the evidence. The Kohberger comparison is instructive because it shows precisely how digital blackouts become prosecution evidence rather than successful concealment. Brian Kohberger turned off his phone before driving to the victim's house in Moscow, Idaho. He believed that eliminating the signal would eliminate the trail. What he did not account for was the inverse. Investigators mapped the gap. His phone was active at home before midnight and active again after 4 o'clock in the morning. The window of silence correlated with cell tower data from his route and became the foundation of the prosecution's timeline. The absence was the evidence. If the suspect in Nancy's case, or any associate of the suspect, turned off their phone between midnight and 4 a.m. on February 1st, that blackout is already visible in the tower data. Investigators do not need to prove where the phone was during those hours. They need to prove the phone was deliberately silenced during the exact window of the crime and reactivated afterward. That pattern of silence, repeated across multiple dates, January 11th, January 23rd, February 1st, becomes a behavioral signature more damaging than any GPS coordinate. Because people who are innocent do not turn their phones off at midnight and turn them back on at dawn on the same nights that surveillance activity occurs near an elderly woman's home. Walder's assessment of the backpack contents included restraint materials and items consistent with transporting a person against their will. That description is not a robbery kit. It is not a burglary kit. Each item is sold individually at hardware stores and big box retailers every single day. No single purchase triggers suspicion, but the combination, purchased by the same person or the same payment method across multiple stores in the weeks before February 1st, is a pattern that transaction analysis can detect. Walmart has cameras. Walmart has transaction records. Walmart has loss prevention infrastructure that rivals some law enforcement operations. The Ozark Trail backpack is a Walmart exclusive. It is sold nowhere else. If that backpack was purchased at a Tucson area Walmart in the weeks before the abduction, the transaction is on file. The buyer's face is on overhead cameras that record continuously at every register and self-checkout station. The vehicle they arrived in is on the parking lot footage. If they paid with a card, a name is attached. If they paid with cash, the timestamp still ties to the camera footage. And if they bought anything else consistent with what Walder described in the same transaction or across multiple visits, that purchase history is a documented record of premeditation. The FBI has had a month to subpoena those records. The Walmart thread was one of the first investigative angles identified publicly, which almost certainly means it is one of the most developed threads being worked privately. The crime scene is now closed. The FBI returned Nancy's home to her family this past weekend. A new security system has been installed. The property that was a forensic environment for 29 days is a private residence again. Forensic scientist Dr. Valentine warned investigators not to rely exclusively on DNA and fingerprints. She urged a broader evidence sweep. Hair, fibers, trace materials. Because if people entered that home, there must be physical evidence of their presence. That warning came as the scene was being released. Whatever was not collected before the home was returned to the family is now subject to contamination, degradation, and permanent loss. The window for trace evidence has closed. CNN's chief law enforcement analyst John Miller assessed the case at the 1-month mark. His conclusion was direct. This is nowhere near a cold case. He identified 3 unresolved questions driving the investigation. The first is what happened to Nancy. Whether she is alive or deceased determines the pace and methodology of everything that follows. With a living victim, urgency leads. With a deceased victim, precision replaces speed. The pace of this investigation, the relocation to Phoenix, the reduced field presence, the methodical focus on footage analysis and DNA processing, communicates what investigators believe even when their words do not. Miller's framing suggests an internal determination has already been made. The pace tells you what the words conceal. Second, motive. Miller pointed to the evidence at Nancy's front door and made a statement that reshapes the entire case. He said that whatever type of crime this started as, things began to go wrong very quickly. Miller's framing suggests what was intended as one type of operation became something far worse at the threshold, a shift in categories that the forensic evidence at the scene appears to support. 2 ransom notes were received in the first week and initially treated as credible. Then communication stopped. Miller raised the possibility that someone wrote those notes after the fact to disguise a home invasion that had already turned violent. The evidence pattern at the threshold, and the absence of similar evidence inside the home, aligns with former FBI agent Johnny Grusing's theory that the confrontation occurred before Nancy was moved. What was designed as a controlled extraction became a violent struggle, and whoever was responsible, realizing the situation had gone beyond recovery, pivoted from the original plan to damage control. The ransom notes were not demands. They were misdirection, written after the crime to point investigators toward a financial motive that never existed. The Bitcoin wallet confirms that reading. Dead since it was created. Zero activity. The FBI's trap payment untouched. If ransom was ever the objective, that wallet would have been accessed through anonymizing technology within days. Its silence is the silence of a prop, a narrative device that served its purpose the moment investigators began chasing a financial theory instead of a personal one. The evidence pattern at the front door aligns with the personal grievance theory that former FBI agent Johnny Grusing proposed. Grusing theorized that the suspect may have lured Nancy onto the porch rather than entering the house to take her from bed. If the confrontation happened at the threshold, it changes the reconstruction of the crime entirely. It means Nancy may have opened the door herself. She may have recognized the person standing on the other side. She may have stepped outside because she had no reason to believe she was in danger. An 84-year-old woman does not open her door at 2 o'clock in the morning for a stranger in a ski mask. She opens it for someone she knows, or for someone sent by someone she trusts, someone who says exactly the right words. Annie sent me. Tommaso asked me to check on you. Words that would move an 84-year-old woman in a nightgown to unlock her door in the middle of the night because the person speaking them is connected to the people she loves most in the world. If you have stayed with this case, if you have watched every video in this series and you are still here, then you already know this investigation matters beyond the headlines. The people who walk away from this channel before subscribing are the same ones who come back a week later and find out they missed the update that changed everything. This case is not over. Subscribe now so that when that moment arrives, you are already here. Tommaso Cayan has not spoken publicly. 1 month. 30 days. His wife's mother was taken from her home and the last person to see her alive, the man who walked her to her door at 9:50 at night, who touched her gate, who looked directly at her camera, who drove away into the desert, has not recorded a video, has not issued a statement, has not appeared beside his wife while she begged the world to find her mother. Savannah has posted multiple emotional pleas. She offered $1 million. She acknowledged her mother may be dead. Annie has cooperated fully with investigators. Cameron spoke on camera directly to the kidnapper. Tommaso has produced nothing. No words, no tears, no public presence of any kind across 30 days. Reporter Brian Enton noted his absence in the 2nd week. It is now the 5th week. The silence has not broken. And silence of this duration in a case of this magnitude under this level of public and investigative pressure is not passive. It is active. It is maintained. It is the product of a decision made every single day to say nothing when every human instinct demands that you speak. 1 month. Not one Instagram post. Not one statement through a lawyer. Not one appearance beside Annie in a public plea. Not one visible act of grief, desperation, or solidarity. Savannah offered $1 million and broke down publicly. Annie cooperated so thoroughly that investigators searched her property and took her car. Cameron addressed the kidnapper directly on video. And the man who was the last human being to see Nancy alive has offered nothing. Not a word. Not a single frame of public presence across 30 days. Law enforcement analysts who have spoken on this case have repeatedly described two distinct behavioral patterns they observe in the people closest to victims. Innocent family members become frantic. They are constantly visible. They make mistakes in their urgency to do something because doing nothing feels like betrayal. They call the tip line. They knock on neighbors' doors. They put their faces in front of every camera available. People who have something to hide exhibit a different pattern. They cooperate strategically. They answer questions with precision. They avoid voluntary statements that can later be used against them. They retain attorneys early. And they maintain silence not because they do not care, but because they have been advised that speaking creates risk. Every word becomes a potential inconsistency. Every public appearance produces a video record that prosecutors can analyze, pausing on microexpressions, word choices, and behavioral indicators that reveal knowledge. Law enforcement analysts have said that behavioral silence under public pressure is one of the most significant indicators they monitor in active investigations. What does that kind of silence tell you in a case this visible, with this much pressure on everyone connected to the victim? Drop your answer in the comments below. This community has been sharper on this case than some of the analysts covering it professionally. The FBI's decision to move operations to Phoenix may not be a retreat. Phoenix is where federal grand juries convene for District of Arizona cases. Phoenix is where the United States Attorney's Office builds federal prosecutions. The shift from Tucson to Phoenix could represent a transition from active investigation to prosecution preparation. If the FBI believes it knows who is responsible and needs additional forensic confirmation before seeking indictments, Phoenix is where that work happens. The public sees a withdrawal. The suspect may be looking at an approach. Dominic Evans spoke. He went to the New York Times and gave 40 minutes of denial. Whether his interview was the act of someone who had nothing to hide or the strategic choice his critics believe it was, is a question only the forensic evidence can resolve. But Evans spoke. Tommaso has not. And the distance between the man who talked and the man who stayed silent is the distance between someone who believes speaking helps their position and someone who has been advised that every word is a liability. The investigation is not finished. It is changing form. The surge of early activity has ended. The spectacle has faded. The media trucks are leaving Tucson. The U.S. strikes on Iran are pulling cameras to a different crisis. The memorial outside Nancy's house is accumulating candles that nobody replaces when the wind takes them down. But underneath that silence, the machinery is moving. 2 DNA profiles in a Florida lab. Genealogy databases being queried. Cell tower dumps being analyzed date by date. 10,000 hours of footage being processed frame by frame. Walmart purchase records being cross-referenced against customer databases. Router logs being examined for devices that should not have been there. And somewhere inside the evidence, in a strand of hair, in a fiber caught on a doorframe, in a Wi-Fi ping that no one thought to conceal, is the name of the person who stood on Nancy Guthrie's porch at 2:12 in the morning and the name of the person who sent them there. The $1 million reward has generated 1,500 new tips since Savannah announced it. 1,500 people who believe they know something. The FBI is processing every one. Anonymous submission. The infrastructure for someone to end this case with a single phone call is built and it is operational. The architect and the operative, if investigators are correct that they exist as two separate people, are running the same calculation tonight that they have run every night for a month. Can I trust the other person to stay silent? Can I trust that the DNA will not resolve to a name? Can I trust that the cell towers missed my phone? Can I trust that the Walmart cameras did not capture my face? Can I trust that the car at 2:36 cannot be traced back to me? Each of those questions has an answer, and those answers are sitting on servers in laboratories and in evidence rooms that do not care about loyalty, silence, or the passage of time. 1 month. No arrest. But the evidence is not waiting for anyone to catch up to it. It has already arrived. It is sitting in queues, being processed, being matched, being traced. The clock that stopped for Nancy Guthrie at 2:28 in the morning on February 1st is still running for everyone else connected to what happened on that street. And it does not stop.